So one of the things that you may not know about Tom and I, but Tom used to speak internationally for the construction for the AGC of America, and so we were invited to speak in front of the Canadian construction team. And
I know this story.
and the reason I'm saying this is because whenever we go and speak, we had different topics, but we really didn't know exactly what each other was going to do. And so we're in front of probably about 400 people. And the night before we go to dinner, and he says, "What are you going to talk about?" And I had this, because I have to have it all outlined out. And so I said, "How about you?" And he said, "I was thinking about this, this, and this." And because of his knowledge, it doesn't matter what he writes down, because he never says what he's going to say when he writes it down. So we get up there, they introduce us, and they're at that time it was Bailey and Brascher, so nobody knew if we were a couple or anything. It was just purely business. Well, anyways, I get up there and he goes into the introduction and he goes through every single point of my talk.
Couldn't remember. I have a bad memory. I was really thought I did good.
Way to go, Tom.
So I rolled my paper up and I'm going, I can't believe, and I was just doing that. And our host was in the second row and they were just aghast. And so then I just said, well, Tom gave my part. What are you going to say? Well, anyways, we went to break and we regrouped and everything. But everything they talked about in the sales meeting this morning is in my notes this morning. So October surprise.
And the thing is, we had to do the same presentation the next day. There's a whole bunch of people came back to see it again to see what we're going to do.
Who's gonna hit who this time?
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah. They just wanted to see if you're still gonna be alive.
That's it. All righty. So we already talked about the October surprise. And to be very fair, Tom put these notes together for me. So, but really, in reality, 3 weeks. Hasn't this summer gone by fast?
Oh, man.
October 1st or 3rd is going to be here. And as you know, there's going to be a big shift on how we get paid and how to educate our client. As a buyer broker, always before, when they talk about how you get paid, we always just said, well, that's part of the commission and that's part of the seller's expense. And we really didn't talk about it. I imagine that the majority of people never knew how much our commission was. But a big shift is coming. And for listing brokers, are you ready? Because before you put that listing up, you've got to go through. Have you taken the training? Do you know what to expect? What are the changes? The whole listing presentation changes everything, because now they have the opportunity to say no. So the seller must select the services commission for not only your services, but also for the listing broker. And to do this as the listing broker, what do you say to the seller? Education and the process of the forms. What's your value proposition? We talked about this earlier. I think collectively, we really need to get this down so that we're coming from a position of strength. And what is your value proposition for the buyer's broker? We really never talked about that before, but it's going to be really important that they support the buyer brokers, especially on those price points of homes, whether you're first-time buyers. That's going to be really important. And they have been paying it all along. So there are major changes. Are you the new listing, exclusive listing and sale and listing agreement? And then there's they said it's revised, but I've never seen Form 1C before. But this is a document you're going to have to go over with your seller, because this is going to be another area of negotiations. So it's so important. So now you have a listing. Now you wait for the buyers to come with an offer. What happens when that offer includes a request to pay for the buyer's broker's commission when they've said no? Fun conversations. Yeah, fun conversations. So buyer brokers, are you ready? Have you taken the training? And you're going to need to do it more than once, because I've looked at those tapes several times and it's just really important. What are you going to do? We do number one, the agency law. We're really good about that, or usually. And number two, before a showing, have you thought about having a buyer's consultation before you do anything? Do you choose who you're going to work with? And so this brings up Muffy. And what's really funny about Muffy is that Tom made this, but it was from Russ. And Russ looked at that the first time he talked about Muffy, and Tom looked at him and said, well, it's you. Motivation. Do you know what your buyer's motivation is? Urgency. How soon do they need to be to buy? And the hardest part of all, their financial capability. You know, one of the things as a new broker, I can remember all the times I didn't care. I didn't care about any of this because I just wanted to show houses, you know, and then we get down to it, they love it. And then we find out financially they weren't able. Well, look at all, we can't afford that gas anymore, or time. And so we really need to give them we really need to do that consultation. I saw a video the other day where a very successful Keller Williams in the Bay Area on the west side, and she said, the first thing I do is I find out, have you been to a lender? Do you have a lender? Are you pre-qualified? Are you pre-approved? Anything? And she said, if they're not, then that's their first step, if they want to work with me, is to be able to do that. And then, are you ready then to show property? And what happens if you don't have these difficult conversations with your buyer? You do an offer and you're writing out an offer, and all of a sudden there's a new line, number 16, buyer brokerage commission. And if you've not had that, that's not the time to have that conversation with your buyer. Okay, so I've gotten ahead of myself. So the revised 21 you can see online, and if you can't find it, let us know. We'll send those to you. I know that they're going to be revising 25 and 28 for condos, but probably the biggest thing is think about, what is your value proposition? Why do you think buyers should work with you? What services are you providing? Now more than ever, we know. Or are you going to wait until you draft the PSA? Hope you have really nice buyers. Say, oh, you know, if I show you a property that they say 0, then I need to have you put this in a contract with me that you will pay me a certain percentage. And we need to have that. All right.
Because what's going to happen is every different listing you look at, some of them might have a 0 for buyer broker commission. Some of them might have 2%, and some of them might have 3%. Everyone is different. You haven't shown any property to your buyer yet. And you need to convince them that in advance, if they're going to pay you something, if they buy a house from you or buy a piece of land from you. And so you need to talk about what percentage that is and how much money it is. Well, many times the buyers, you're wondering if they have enough money for their earnest money and down payment, but now they want to fork up money to pay you for showing them property. If you don't do it right off the bat before you show them property, and you wait until you have an offer you're going to write up, and then you turn around and say, oh, by the way, you have some extra money to pay for the commission for, what do I write in here? That's an awkward position to be in. So it's something as we went through and we're writing these things up between us, started saying that value proposition is going to make the difference for how comfortable you are when you have a client you don't even have a full relationship built with yet, and say, I can't do this for free. It's $5, $6 a gallon driving around in mountains or hills or riding around, and all the time I'm investing and searching and finding things and helping you through a transaction. I got to know that I'm not doing it for free. So that's,
So in the notes today, the last 2 pages are all of the Northwest MLS videos. And the first 3, do them in the morning because they will put you to sleep, but it's good history. And it just talks about how did this happen and why from 2019 are we just now changing our forms. So those are good videos. And then there's in the update, they came out with one where they're talking specifically about the forms. But when you plug into Northwest MLS, you know how they always say what upcoming classes are coming? Make sure you sign up for as many Zoom ones as you can, because every time I listen to it, I get a little bit of a different nugget, a different way, different perspective.
now everything you see up on the screen is going to be out this afternoon and be emailed to you. Okay. All of these links, we've went through and looked at all of these links. The one that Marcia talked about is the last one. This one is the newest one that came out. It's where Annie Fitzsimmons sits down with a broker from, I think she's from Tacoma, and they just start talking about, what do you say to your buyer when you first meet them and you have your first consult with them? What are you going to say? That's what that one is about. Part 1 and part 2. Part 1 is all about the lawsuits for the Department of Justice, and then all the other people are jumping on board, filing things. What the logic is, most of them are from sellers' point of view, saying that the seller is at disadvantage, and now there's some new suits say it's from the buyer's point of view. I'm not going to go into it. It's, if you are interested in that one, that one's there. Number 2 started talking about the compensation and transparency, the broker commission, and that concept. And then again, I put times on here so you know how much these things are going to be before you start watching them. And then on 3, they really started looking at Form 21, and that's how do you fill in Form 21 and what that does. Then on item 4, 5, and 6, they hit the different forms for listing. 41C is the one that I think is probably in this forum. We'll start going into these in more detail, but probably trying to spend most of the time right here, because when you go to write an offer, this ends up being attached to the offer in the purchase and sale agreement. And when that's inserted in there, it has the options of what happens if whatever the seller offered was 0, or whatever the seller offered was less than what your buyer had offered to you, or what happens if the seller's offering more and what the buyer offered you is less. What do you do with the difference of that money? Does it go, because this goes to the buyer, not to the broker. So it has to go to the buyer, and then from the buyer to the brokerage firm, which is kind of a weird thing, but the way you have it set up. And then the last way is I forgot. But, that Form C has all of these different options in it. And so depending on when you're talking to your buyer, what is the option of whether they keep the extra money, or whether that money goes to the brokerage firm, or does that go to closing costs, or what happens to it? So that's what's in these films. And again, I'll have all those mailed out and have the links sent out to you. So that kind of is the putting the toe in the water. We keep trying to find more education. We went to the seminar last Thursday. It really didn't do it for me for understanding how to apply and use these forms. And that's what I wanted to hear. And so I think what's going to happen is Marcia and I are going to end up doing some kind of role play with each other with the forms, filling them out as buyers with sellers, and try and understand the mechanics of the forms first. And when we do that, I think what I did with the contingent sale with the matrix, I think there's going to be an opportunity to build another one of those things with what are the things in the sequences, because there's a real timeline from you first you meet your seller, and then you sit down with your seller to get a listing agreement. And then you're pretty used to saying, okay, what's the commission for the seller? But then you have to say, what are you going to offer the buyer? And explain to them that it is their choice whether to do it or not. But what are the options if they put 0 in there? What are the plus, minus, and interesting about that one there, pros and cons? And try and work that through. And then when the offers start coming in on the listing side, how's that going to be filled out? Because if they put a really low number on that and the buyer doesn't want to have the money or proceeds, and so what they do is they put into that Form 41C that they would like to have the seller pay the difference for what the buyer agreed to pay to them. They don't have all the money for it. Then all of a sudden in the offer, out of the proceeds, net proceeds, part of that would go back and pay for the brokerage for the buyer. And when that's in an offer stage, you're looking at what your counter offer is going to be coming back about rechanging that form, saying, no, we'll do this. And so there's a full negotiation going to go back and forth in your purchase and sale agreement about the buyer's broker's commission. And I just want to give a broad brush of that, but that's what these forms do. That's how they're linked together. And it's not all in one place. It's spread out over 4 or 5 different forms. You have to follow the trail.
Why
through.
wouldn't it be?
They've never made anything else easy.
Tom, do you know if it's gonna still show up, like, you know how the buyer's commission shows up on listings right now? Do you know if it will show up there still?
Yes, it
Yeah,
will.
Okay,
It will.
And
so we could potentially be getting into a situation where buyer's agents aren't wanting to show.
Which would be completely against the ethics rules and completely
Sure.
against everything else. But when
Sure.
you talk about reality, how excited are you going to be about getting ready to go down that road as a human being?
Right,
But as a professional broker, that should not enter into it.
sure.
But that is, I mean, we're in a world where I think we've talked about this many times in this forum, is there are so many brokers that are either part-time, amateur, they've sold a house to their mom or dad, that really haven't gone into understanding the full role and professionalism of being a realtor. And so you just don't know what's out there in the world of who've spent 90 hours and got a license and what they're going to do with it.
Tom.
Yeah.
Would you say technically this has always been a conversation in Form 1A SWF when you're setting up a listing agreement? There's already been a portion of the overall commission set aside for the buyer broker. So technically, the opportunity for that conversation has always been there. They're just making these forms much more apparent where that money's going.
Oh, that sounds nice. And I'm hearing all the tapes. They're talking about what a great opportunity it is. They have really nice fuzzy names on them. Hey, this is great. It's going to clarify everything. I'm sorry. I'm not in that camp. I look at this as saying, as a listing broker, is not going to change that much, because you're always talking about what you can do a commission, which is going to include buyer and seller.
Mhm.
But Marcia has always lived in the world of listing, because when we went into business with Russ in 2011, it was like he was the tip of the spear and left a huge wake behind him. And Marcia was on his left shoulder and did all the listing, and I'm on the other side and I did all the buying. So I'm a buyer broker. And so I look at it differently. My world as a buyer broker is very, very different, because my methodology for developing a rapport with a brand new buyer, I decided early on it was not a good idea to say, how much money do you have, as the first conversation. Hey, what's your credit score? Do you have a pre-approval? And do you have enough money for earnest money and down money? And how much down money are you going to put on this if you buy something $300,000? And how much of your monthly payments can you afford? Next thing I know, they're out of my door and they're going down to the brokerage firm down the street. They're scared to heck out. They don't, it's like they're private. You have to break down the walls before you start talking money with somebody the first time. That's my learning experience. So now they have shifted this, and it's a good question, Lauren, when you did that. But what that did for my world is all of a sudden it shoved it right up front and said, well, before we go look at this first piece of property, I start burning up, $5 a gallon fuel to take you, and we're going to go there. I need to know I'm going to get paid.
Right.
How much are you going to pay me? Oh, great. Thank you. Now here's my first combination. Instead of me telling you, oh, how much money do you have? Do you have for a loan? Now I'm saying, you going to pay me?
Yeah.
So that's a little different. So if I'm just a listing broker on the other side and I just like working with sellers, okay, I can agree with you, Lauren. That's okay. But if I'm going to switch over to the buy side, my world is upside down right now. How am I going to turn around and really be able to educate them in a way before they come in your office and want to go look at a house? Can I explain this to them in 5 minutes? How am I going to do? How do you bridge that? Or do you go show it to them, and then as you're talking, driving around, is that going to be your style? And then you come back from the first showing and say, hey, before we go any further, I need to do this. There has to be a technique that fits your personality and how you size up. And when you know your client well enough that you feel comfortable talking to them about it. Now I have an advantage because Marcia and I have been working as a team for years, and we've always found if I'm working to take someone out to show them, and it's a couple, we bond so fast with Marcia talking and me talking and back and forth, and we develop that. And once that opens up, other conversations are now on the table. But if I'm a lone broker and I don't have a partner to help break down the team that I'm talking to, I got to figure a way of breaking through that. So that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I see it. I see it being more of a conversation for buyers and brokers. It's just,
But a value proposition has to be powerful. It has to come from the heart, and it has to come across like you're not being a salesperson. It has to be something that has some links to it that they understand and get a hold of and say, yeah, I understand. But I also can tell them is that if you don't have enough, then I'm going to have to ask for it in the purchase and sale agreement when we make an offer. So that means you might get $10 and you might get 2%. You don't know.
and that's what I would always say to sellers who are tempted to say, I'm not going to offer any commission to buyer broker. It's like, okay, we'll be prepared for lowball offers because those buyers are going to have to come up with the cash somewhere to pay their broker.
It's kind of like that loan buy down we were talking last week, which I still want to talk to you and Michael about. But
Yeah.
So what do? You put it into the price for the loan, you can pay for some of it down, or I don't know. This is to be continued. I didn't have a full preparation today. Marcia and I talked about that. I thought it was better if we turned around and had a conversation about what are the value propositions going to be, and how do we get around that? We've sent some things to Russ. I think it should be a discussion between all of us together to try and make how because all of ours collectively will probably help build it out in a way that has more power behind it, because there's a lot of things Keller Williams offers that others don't. Whether it's Keller Williams Keller Mortgage, it's our relationship with prime lending. So it's with our financing side of things. But we've got to build that list out. And if that list really works for one of us, it'll probably work for all of us. Then it's a matter of putting it in your own words and how you want to deliver it.
Yeah, I've talked with Sydney and the Boyles and stuff about that a couple of times, and kind of almost doing like a panel type thing. But I mean, I think to have something value proposition on both like listing and buyer side, I think would be absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
Because everyone kind of brings something different to the table, with their presentations with sellers and buyers. And yeah, I'd be all for picking everyone's brain for that.
I mean, we could take a Tuesday a meeting, one of our Tuesday meetings, and just say that our agenda is going to be for us to build out our propositions. Do it collectively, and write it up on the screen as we're writing it and building it out, and then we have to send it out. We can talk about it next week if people want to change things and add to it. But if we don't do that, 3 weeks is coming fast.
Yeah.
And then pretty soon you got to do it.
Hey, Tom.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Where are you? Hello.
Hey, Melody.
Melody, how you doing?
I'm good. So I think that the buyer's agreement, agency agreement, is going to come into play really heavily now. I think it's going to be really super important, and we've been doing that from day one. And part of Sydney shared this with me a long time ago, and there's a section in the buyer's agency agreement where I put in other and say that if the seller is not offering compensation, then the buyer agrees to pay me 2.5%. And that's a conversation I have pretty much up front now with them. And I help them understand, like if we go look at FSBOs, now this is really going to be even more evident, I think, and important. Just down under, let's see, the compensation from the buyer under B. Further down. Does that make sense?
Mhm. Yes, I'm tracking with you.
I guess I've changed it a little, huh?
This is the new form.
So is there not a space now for that?
Well,
Well,
it just
this is the new
states-
form. You have agency, area exclusive agency,
There's the
terms of
compensation.
agreement. Then this is the new compensation clause in the form. This goes live on the,
So on
on the
line
3rd.
22, you put your 2.5%, and then clause B there would state that if the seller is offering any less than that, the buyer would make up the difference.
Right. And so that's basically the same thing as the way I just explained it before. Like if the seller's offering compensation, generally, I would just accept that, and that's how I explain it to them. But now it'd be a little more laid out for them. So if you haven't been using buyer's agency agreements, this would be a good time to start.
Yep.
Well, yeah, it's not a good time to start. It's a must. If you
Yes.
don't, you're laying yourself open for not being compensated.
Not being compensated. And I had that conversation pretty much in the initial stages, and just to help them understand, look, you get a paycheck every week or every other week, or even you get retirement, you guys get paid regularly. This is how I get paid. And this is why I do this, and go into all of those things. But your value propositions, Sarah, is absolutely very important now, even more than it was before for buyers.
And this form I have up is the 41C I mentioned. This is a part of the purchase and sale agreement. And this what happens, you have to select a box about brokerage firms compensation, no compensation offered by the seller. There's the one where the buyer representation agreement has whatever that's in it, if you're going to use that. You can send a credit back to the buyer if there's a difference over and under. Reduction by the buyer brokerage firm compensation, you just agree to take less money to make the deal work. So this form, these are the forms. By the way, I know that I sent these out previously. You can get them off Northwest MLS. I have these highlighted. When I send out the minutes for today, I'll attach these forms to them that are highlighted. I'll also have all those links so everybody can do that. And Melody, I think you're right on. It's something that not only should, it's a must. We have to start really looking at how we're going to fill these things out.
They can also find them under Northwest MLS. If
Yes.
you go to their homepage, bulletins, and it's legal bulletin 222.
Yep.
And
And
then,
they've got redlined versions of these
Yes.
forms that kind of show what's changing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Lisa Rouse had her hand raised. Lisa, did you want to ask a question?
Sure. Right now it states what the buyer's commission is on the, when you see the listing. So is that gonna go away?
No,
it will just show what the seller is willing to pay.
Yeah, so Lisa, my hope is that wouldn't change, right? If I'm being an optimist, I'd say that everybody continue doing business as usual, but it does, the changes in the forms make it much more apparent that the seller is opting whether or not to pay. And so the theory is that we may end up with more listings that don't pay much or don't pay anything at all. So we're just getting prepared for that possibility.
so this is the homepage for our Northwest MLS, and if I click on over here, there's legal bulletin 222. If I come down, this is gives the overview on it. If I click on this link, it takes me to where I can download all the forms right here.
Yeah, and that red line format will
Induction.
go through and tell you what's changed. They'll have a red line through what's moved, and they'll highlight in red what's different or new.
Okay.
So it'll no longer be like a split, it can just be like a certain cash amount for the buyer's broker, or is it like if they do opt to give a buyer's commission, it has to be like a split?
They're putting that option in.
Oh, okay.
It's yeah.
I would imagine most listing agents that are properly counseling their sellers will still continue to offer a healthy split, but there's no guarantees there. Ashley also had her hand up. Ashley, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, so one thing I kind of talked to Lauren about yesterday in watching the fourth and fifth video that Annie first published. So with Tom saying that the, buyer's agency form is a must, Annie kind of made it sound like if you don't have that form signed in conjunction with the 41C, then you're actually taking away the negotiation power from the buyer, like the ability to negotiate for them. Because if you don't have the buyer's agency agreement, 41C kind of works with the commission that you already talked about. So if you don't have those two forms, and let's say the seller isn't offering anything, but it's been on the market for a while, so you want to go in and negotiate, like it takes away your ability to have a conversation about it, is kind of what I understood from her. So it's like you essentially need that form. And I don't know if that's her being super cautious, legal wise, but I think that's a super easy way to get your buyers to sign it, is my thought.
There's
Yeah, that's a good point.
there's so many really unanswered questions as far as being definitive. And I think it's because until people start using it and start firing off questions to the legal hotline, a lot of these things that have holes in it or just gray without real clear direction on it are going to be flushed out. October is going to see a whole flurry of these things on the hotline.
Yeah, I should just ask that question. I
Yeah.
could just do that and see what she says to make sure it's, a must, is the way that she explained it. Cause yeah, it was a little, those fourth and fifth videos got pretty heavy.
Actually, if you do that, I would love to have that, make sure that in our forum here, you bring that back after you get an answer on that question. That'd be great.
Yeah, I can definitely do that.
No, in YouTube, I've joined the subscribe to the forum for Washington Realtors. If you go into YouTube and you get to their site, right now it's full of the 6-part, 6, 5, 4, 3, all of that series. This is the actual videos that I have in those links. That's where I got them from. Okay. All right. How much time do we have left?
We are at 12:14, so we've got time.
Okay. I wanted to slip another topic in because I don't want to go into the forms until we really have a better understanding of them so that we can have a better back and forth discussion. The next topic that I was going to be hitting is in the area of feasibility and inspection. And there's such an overlap between feasibility and inspection because you can have both of these forms in an offer or one of these forms or the other in an offer. Because feasibility is about how a property is going to meet, how they use the property, what they want to use it for in the future. Whereas inspection is what's the condition of it today in the present. And if you start thinking about it in future and present, you can kind of see how the concept is divided out. Now in feasibility in land, you still have some of the present there because if it has a well on it, then maybe you need a well addendum. If it has a septic system, then get a septic addendum. So there's specific other addenda that can get into evaluating existing conditions on a land if you're doing a land offer. Now, what I did is I broke it down going into before a purchase and sale agreement versus after. And so I want to go into this subject. Not going to be able to cover it all today, but I want to lay this one out. It depends on how much we go into Bulletin 222 next week, but this is the roadmap that I have built out. Before a purchase and sale agreement, we have 35P, which is a pre-inspection addendum. And this is in a case where before the buyer says, well, I'd kind of like to know the condition of the place before I make an offer. It might make a difference in how much I make my offer for. And you say, well, we could talk to the listing broker and the seller and provide a pre-inspection addendum that we fill out to them to see if they will sign it. If they sign it, you have the same rights that you have if you have a mutual contract and you want to have an inspector go onto that property. It has the same rules. You can't, you have to replace things the way they were before you found them. You're liable for if you do any damage. The report you shouldn't show to the seller. It's the same thing. But with the difference of it is that after you do that, if you go ahead and make an offer, then you'll probably be attaching a Form 35W, which is a waiver form. And what that does is it says, okay, seller, this is a pretty strong offer because I'm making my offer after a pre-inspection and we waive inspection. However, these are the things that I'd like to have corrected in my offer. I'd like to have, if it needs a new roof, or if there's something you want to have, just like a Form 35R, when you go back and forth, you can make requests in the offer for what you would like in order to waive that inspection. And it's in the offer while you're going back and forth in a counter offer situation before mutual. Now, another thing about this form is we have many offers that we've seen. Haven't seen one recently, but this summer and this spring, we had a lot of offers coming in waiving inspection. And waiving inspection is a really big deal, is a very high risk as a broker. If a broker recommends that to a buyer, is extreme liability in that. And so we have to bend over backwards that if a buyer wants to waive inspection, this form can be used for that and attached to the purchase and sale agreement. In addition to that, there's a Form 22F, which is probably very rarely used, but it also is a great product that I want to introduce and go over, because if that is what your buyer wants, if you know how we push so hard on your agency law pamphlet, having that signed when you first meet them, then sign it again when you're doing the offer, put in your 22D item 12 that the buyer acknowledges receipt of the agency law pamphlet. I mean, we do it 2, 3, 4 times. If you're going to have a buyer waiving inspection, this is what this is. This is another form that reviews, talks about it. If they initial it, you put it in your transaction file or in your support package of documents you send into the office or to the other broker. And that is all things that really want to go through that's before an offer and before mutual. Now, after that, we have a contract, and then I'd like to go into Form 35 inspection addendum, 35R inspection response, and then also 35C notice of seller consent and inspection report. This one here is interesting because in your 35, when you're filling it out, there's 2 options you could check boxes on related to whether a seller would like to say it's okay to get a copy of the inspection report, or only show me something that you're saying you want to have fixed and only that portion of it. Well, if you're in mutual and neither of those boxes are checked and you inadvertently show anything to that seller, then all of a sudden you have just waived inspection. It's a big deal. Now, if during that, the listing broker gets a request from the seller because they're being asked to replace something and say, well, I want to see that report, then at that time you would use a 35C, which then gives by initials on that notice to the broker for the buyer that the buyer has permission to share that either portion or all of that report with the seller as a part of negotiating what to do when the results of the inspection. Okay. Now, with that, we have a well addendum or septic addendum, which could be used either for land deals or for home deals, depends on the shape of the property. I thought we'd go through that. And then also at the end, I have 35F, which is the feasibility addendum and the 90P disapproval. Okay. So that's kind of what I have lined out and built out. So for today, I don't have enough time to do justice in diving into the forms and into the matrix. And I'd kind of like to get some feedback before we break off today about what we do next week. Because in this forum, we've been carrying over topics 2 or 3 weeks in a row. And I want to make sure that what we put out on the agenda makes the most for who's in attendance and who's coming and who wants to contribute and interact. And so I'd like a little feedback, whether you want us to really dive into that 222 bulletin next week, or would you rather go into the inspection? I see bobbing heads out here.
Ashley has a question again. I think.
Hey, Ashley, what's up?
Hey, so I guess before I answer that question, something I just thought of and wanted to clarify, so that kind of goes back into what we first talked about. So my thought, and I want to just ask this question. So if there's a seller that's not offering any commission, if we're talking to our buyers about that scenario, I wanted to clarify it because I'm sure there's going to be buyers that are just going to want to, do it themselves or, whatever, and not understand what it really means to use the listing agent on both sides. So if they, let's say want to do it themselves, unless they hire a lawyer or use the listing agent, there's really nobody advising them of these other forms, right?
There isn't anybody advising them. You're talking on the listing side?
No, on the buyer's side.
On
So
the
if they're
buyer's side?
do it
The-
themselves, they wouldn't know about a well addendum, an inspection.
They
Like they
wouldn't.
wouldn't know where to get those forms, right?
Unless they're a real estate broker. Even if they are a real estate broker, there's so many forms that brokers have no idea exist and what their
Mhm.
purpose is. I would say it'd be very rare.
Gotcha. Okay. And then to answer your question, I mean, since we're getting close to October, I think it'd kind of be good to just start to get the value proposition feedback. Cause I mean, I would really like to have more ideas of things to say and just get feedback from everybody. I think doing that sooner rather than later, in my opinion, would be great.
Okay,
Yeah, I
Right,
second that.
JR, Lauren?
Yeah, Ashley hit the nail on the head there too. A lot of people don't know that these forms even exist, and that's a big part of our value proposition is knowing. I mean, that limited practice of law is huge. And we're often much less expensive than having an attorney draft all these forms and go over them. So,
Well, and that's a good point. With acting as an attorney within a limited capacity, which is what we do, not understanding a new form is a red flag.
Yep.
Then we need a swing vote on this. Hunter, I know you're a swing voter. Huh?
I would love to learn more about this.
All right, there we go.
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah, and that's a big part of. I mean, Ashley mentioned that's a part of our value proposition, and
Yeah.
I think that's probably where we start is just making sure people. I mean, it's already daunting enough that people have to come up with money to do real estate, and then knowing now that they have to they could end up doing it wrong and doing it illegally even after they come up with all the money. It's a big part of having an agent in your corner.
Since we're going to go down that road, there's two things that are apparent. One of them is understanding the forms, what's in there, so you're even capable of teaching others, like your customers, what they are, why it's important, and then the value proposition. I would recommend developing a value proposition for the listing broker, and a value proposition looking at for the buyer broker. I think the buyer broker needs to deliver the seller listing broker needs to deliver that buyer broker proposition to the seller when they're doing their listing. So it's used of both. But I think we should have a written product that ends up being more like a checklist, because writing out a script has to be personal for you, from your heart, to communicate to somebody. You can't be reading off a piece of paper. I mean, scripts are funny. If they're not memorized and don't really come from where you're at. I mean, I used to do scripts, but now I don't need them anymore. Because you pretty well have your own script memorized and it comes out naturally. But if we made some checklists of some real key things that we have as an organization or we have as a broker with that checklist, that would probably make it easier to deliver when we sit down and talk to a buyer. Why don't we try and build that out next week, build some of that out. And also at the same time, I think, why don't we bring in some of those forms? We've got them pretty well highlighted. Maybe we can look at some of the listing side, and then have some discussion on the value proposition as part of next week. In the meantime, Lauren, I'd like to talk to Russ more about that next meeting next Tuesday, because I think that's something we probably should have. Everybody should be a part of. At some point, if we develop something that we have to take it to the whole team.
When I was talking with Russ about this very subject, I believe our office is going to be making some changes that will enhance the value proposition of our brokers.
Wonderful.
So this is a perfect time if he's ready to share that.
Okay. All right. So let's do that. Our target next week will be the new bulletin 222 changes for October 3rd. Get ahead of that. And then wait. I have the inspection one because that's when we have a whole lot of it. And Ashley, are you still online?
Yeah.
Actually, you and I had a conversation about one of the times we went through one of your offers or your mutuals on inspection. I'd like to get the dust off of that. I'd like to have that so that you and I can present that.
Yeah, I'll have to, God, we've had so many conversations. I'll have to think of which one. we're
Yeah, but
talking
you're
about.
younger
But
than I
yeah.
am. I know you have a better memory.
No, the memory's shot. It's fine. I'll just look back at emails.
Okay, I have some too. I'll reach out to you. I'll find what I
Okay.
have it. We'll talk. Okay. Thank you.
Sounds, yeah.
Okay. All right. So I think that's it for today.
Thank you so much, Tom.
Thank
Thanks,
you, everybody.
for joining.
Appreciate everybody showing up. And I'll send all that info out we had up on the screen.